Welcome back to another Rich Martin podcast, and we have got a great one today. It is with Dan Blythe, who is the director of Alpha Youth and has the amazing job of helping young people come to know more about Jesus. And he talks really openly and frankly about what's working, what's a challenge in this day and age of working with young people. And Dan has got this depth of knowledge and this insight, which I know will inspire you in all that you're doing. And so we're going to jump into it. Enjoy, listen in, and wait till the end, because Dan also talks about how Alpha Youth and how it runs in churches is helping change people. So let's jump into Dan Blythe. All right, it's brilliant to be here with Dan Blythe. And for those that don't know Dan is an amazing guy based here in the UK. And we've already talked a little bit on the intro about Dan, but so good to have you here, mate.
Thanks. We'd really love to be part of this, mate. I love your podcast. So it's an honor to be part of this one today.
Oh, you're a good man. And it'd be really good for anyone listening. Just give them a brief overview of Dan Blythe, how you've got to what you're doing and what you're currently doing now.
Yeah, sure. Age 18, I went backpacking to Australia, not Christian. Ended up meeting some other people who were just like sort of like my age, and they just had something that I had not experienced before. And I asked them questions, and as cheesy as it might sound, they were just like, "It's Jesus." And so I wanted to know more about Jesus. They took me to church, they took me surfing, they took me to boxing, took me to Connect Group. But I knew by the end of that week, I wanted to follow Jesus. So I did. Had so much issues and baggage, which didn't just drop off me straight away. There were certain like rhythms and patterns which were kind of unhealthy, because I'd spent all my teenage years sort of like running from God or far from God. And they just didn't break off me overnight. And so I went to Bible college. Not that that is ever a place to get rid of your bad habits, but for me, being in this like goldfish bowl incubator, surrounded by people who love Jesus, they just kept encouraging me. And week after week, certain things just kept dropping off me. And then by the end of my first year at Bible college, I knew I had to go back to the UK, because if I could just help one young person encounter the grace that I had encountered out there, then I knew it'll be worth it. So I ended up going back to England and asked my mum and my dad, I'm like, "Do you guys know any churches that need a youth worker?" They didn't know anyone. So I got Christianity magazine, because in the back there's all these different jobs. And it said, "How would you love to be part of a citywide youth ministry?" And I thought, yeah, that'd be great. Happened to be Canterbury, which is the smallest city in the UK. And I went there, and part of the interview was going to Pizza Hut with 15 of the teenagers. Half of them were from the local estate, which was like low income households. And then half of them were kind of church kids growing up with Christian parents. And my heart just broke for these young people. And I knew I had to say yes to this role, and started youth ministry, age 21. I'm now 37. And across those years, I've done youth ministry in lots of different contexts. And it's been my greatest privilege and an honor. And so now I get to work on a global scale, helping young people, I guess, have the opportunity and a conversation around who is Jesus and why did he die? Why did he rise again? And what does that mean for our life?
Mate, what a great journey. I love the fact that you go back to like how you met Christ. Normally when I ask people like tell us a little bit about it, it's like I've got 3 kids. You give us it. It's awesome. Tell us your role. So you're at Alpha now. What's the official title that you've got, and what does that involve?
Yeah, so I'm a global youth director. Pretty much it just involves listening to all our different youth directors across the globe, in Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America, America, Canada, and making sure what we do isn't from the top down saying this is the way we do youth ministry, but it's listening to what's happening on the ground. So everything that we create, whether it's culture or content, but it is for the church. Everything that we do is for the church. We're not trying to attach people to ourselves. We're trying to help the local church reach young people. So really my job is just to listen. And I think listening is probably one of the most important leadership traits that you can have. I think it's something that I'm never going to move away from, but just continuously been in this posture of listening.
What I love about you, Dan, is like everything you're talking about. You skipped over a big part, which is you pastored for a number of years in the UK, and you were pastoring there, which is amazing. And so now you're doing this stuff with Alpha, and it's coming from this great, deep, rich history of like understanding local church, knowing what local church looks like on the ground. What is it that you're loving about working with Alpha? Because when we grew up, that Alpha was like a parachurch organization. It was like separate from the church, and you'd have like Youth for Christ, parachurch, whole lot of other things that were going around, right? That would be kind of broadly put under that scope. Yeah, I think that's kind of dropped off now. And what we realize is, Blumnet, the church can't cope really. We need these other organizations that are like specialists in these areas, be it like Christians Against Poverty or Alpha or a whole heap of, what Andy's doing at the Message Trust, like these amazing groups that have got this pioneering spirit that can go and do some stuff. What is it you're loving about your role at Alpha?
I love that at Alpha, there's a real culture of prayer, and there always has been over the last 30 years since it was developed. If we don't spend time praying, if we don't spend time waiting on the Holy Spirit, then we're not going to have anything in the tank to actually do what we're called to do. So there's a real sense of waiting before we do, and I love that. Naturally, I'm the sort of leader who tends to build the plane while we're flying. We just sort of like crack on, and that's kind of like counterculture to the Alpha culture, which is we spend time waiting and hearing from God first. So I'm loving that. I'm loving listening to lots of different denominations, the Catholics, the Baptists, the Pentecostals. Alpha goes into many different denominations. And so listening to them and what's working for them, what's not working for them, making sure that as we create, we're not just saying it's for this denomination, but it's actually for all denominations. So we have to listen to them to make sure that what we do is going to actually help and serve them, which takes humility. And so what I'm not saying is I'm massively humble, but what I am saying is that I've noticed in Alpha a culture of humility, which I'd probably say comes from Nicky Gumbel and Pippa Cumble, who started Alpha. They're two of the most humble people that I've met. Even when you're in the room with them and you start sort of saying about, how much, I guess, success has been attached to Alpha, they quickly change the subject and make it about the one or something else. They don't take affirmation or encouragement well, and that humility I think is so important, especially if we never say we're a parachurch organization, because everything that we do is to go through and for the church. So it is a parachurch organization, but yeah, it's meant to be just resourcing the church. And so for us to resource the church, you need to have massive humility to be able to listen to them and then make sure that if we've created something that isn't working for the church anymore, then we need to pull the brakes and innovate it and change it so that it does actually help serve in the church. So I think prayer, humility are two key things that I love about the Alpha culture.
Oh mate, I could listen to that all day. And I spent a day with Nicky Gumbel and a whole lot of American pastors the other month, and it was just amazing listening to him up front and hearing his heart. And so everything he's saying, I'm thinking I'll have a slice of Nicky Gumbel's spirit if I could possibly get it.
Yeah.
Talk us through. I want to jump into your like brain of working with young people in church, and obviously a lot of pastors that listen or people building local church here. Before we jump into that, because I know we'll reference this, could you give us like an overview of what a millennial is, what a Gen Z is, what generation Alpha, like what does that look like? How does that work? What are the differences? Just so that when we do start talking about it, people know what it is.
Yeah, for sure. So millennials, also known as Generation Y, are born from 1980 to 1994. So right now, they're aged between 25 to 39. So I'm a millennial, and
Me
the
too, Dan.
time, yeah, yeah. And we kind of said that we thought we were quite mighty, thought we were quite revolutionary because we started speaking up about stuff. But the truth is, we didn't really have the confidence to really follow through with some of the things that we started speaking up about. It's actually the next generation, Gen Z, who are bringing around the change that the millennials, I guess, once wanted to see. Uh, Gen Z are the children of Gen X, which is the generation above millennials. And I think when we look at generations, it's really important to look at the parents of the different generations because they hugely impact, I guess, the why behind what they're talking about and how they're living their life. So Gen Z, which would be teenagers today, born in 1995 to 2009, they're aged 10 to 24. 10 to 24. So you've got all the teenagers and then you got the lower end of sort of young adults. And Gen Z, they're called like snowflakes because people say they're flaky, they're entitled, they don't show up when they say they're going to show up, they ghost you, which means you call them and text them, they don't call you and they don't text you back. And the world will put a very negative term on this generation. But I always love to think what God says about a generation. And when I hear the word snowflake, I know here in London, when snowflakes move together, shops, streets, and schools are shut down. We can't handle snow in London. And that's the power of togetherness. And that's what I'm seeing with this generation. Through the digital revolution, they're using their voice together and they're bringing around change, not just micro, but macro change. But when you think about, I guess, millions and millions of snowflakes moving together, you get what's called an avalanche. And an avalanche totally changes the landscape. And I think that's what I'm starting to see with this generation. They're not just changing a few things, they're actually changing what church culture looks like. They're changing what work culture looks like. They're changing what online culture looks like. They're changing what brands are doing. Biggest, most wealthiest brands in the world are changing their whole campaigns just to reach a generation, not to not to help them, but really just to sell to them. Which makes me think, as someone involved in the local church, how much more should we be listening to this generation so that we can equip them, serve them, and love them. So I think the important thing about Gen Z to remember is that they're the biggest generation on the planet. The 1.9 billion on the planet are Gen Z. And so that's why brands and everyone are changing everything to reach them, is because they know if they're going to make profit, they need to engage this generation. But then, interesting enough, after Gen Z is Generation Alpha, because they've gone X, Y, Z, finished at the English alphabet. Now they're starting at the Greek alphabet. So it'll go Generation Alpha, then Generation Beta. So Generation Alpha is born from 2010 to 2024. So they're age 0 to 9. And then under that, Generation Beta will be from 2025. So I guess for people's minds, so you can understand, millennials, when they were teenagers, the internet came into play and we started, being able to download and, listen to music online. For Gen Z, that's when the smartphone really came into play, and it was normal for them to have apps to share, social media. And I think for Gen Alpha, as they grow up, voice activation and I guess Meta will all be part of their world. So like my 4-year-old walks into the room and says, hey Siri, play Moana, you're welcome. Like he just tells this device to play the song and it just does it. So, completely different generations, and technology is having a massive impact on, I guess, their lifestyle.
And it's so good, your description of it, and good to hear it all laid out there. I think now you place that on local church, right? Local churches working with young people. Me and you grew up through youth ministries that were, you turn up, you sit in a moldy room particularly, and it was like kind of you were stuffed away in a corner. Or, you had a great experience. Some of mine were really good. And then you go to a camp at summer and you're kind of taught out of paper of what the Bible said, or you memorize a scripture, or do you know what I mean? And they were the kind of dynamics of what youth ministry was. And it was like, let's just hope we can get them through to adulthood. What about now with everything you described, particularly the digital shift? Where are churches winning, and where is there improvement needed from your perspective? I understand none of us want to slate the church en masse. We love the body like we do, but there's always room for improvement. What's working from this? You talk about this denominational approach that you're able to look at. What do you see that's working? Where is there improvement needed to be made? What would help people?
Yeah, and I feel like we could write a book on this very subject. I think churches that are doing well with youth work are churches that are very personal with their young people. They know them by name, and there's always a tension. It's like, are we a youth ministry which is here to reach the city and the town and the village, and we hope that every single young person potentially might walk through our doors, or are we a youth group which is there to disciple the young people which are part of the church? And sometimes it's really hard to do both, to create these like evangelistic crusades where you're seeing loads of people come to Jesus, and at the same time, just be faithful, discipling the young people that you've got in your hands. I think it's a bit of both. The churches that are really doing well, it's not one or the other. They've got the small groups where they're discipling the young people and they're helping them to create spaces for them to invite their own friends. What we're seeing is that young people are looking for a judgment-free space. They're looking for a place where they can bring their opinion and won't be excluded if their opinion is not accepted. They're looking for a place where they can trust. So there's an old saying which saying, young people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that never gets old. It's the same for every generation. Like no matter how much incredible, I guess, stuff you have to share. Until they know that you actually care about them, they don't want to hear what you have to say. So I think creating spaces where you can decipher the young people that you have within your youth group and then help them to become, I guess, evangelistic. But that might not mean them going to the streets and shouting, eternal burn, because that method of evangelism really won't work with this generation. But creating spaces where they can just invite their friends with different perspectives on life for them to have conversations, open conversations, shame-free conversations about, and meet them where they are in life. I think that's the sort of youth work that is moving forward. I also think that the model of, and as a youth pastor since I was 21, so I'm talking about probably over 13 years of youth ministry here, which isn't, the world's greatest, running of
No,
youth
but
ministry.
but it is long, Dan. I've got to give you that. That's an amazing achievement. So I think I was a youth pastor for like 10 years. So you know what I mean? You're like caning it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I've got probably a list of things that I would have done differently if I was to go back in time, much longer than the things I would do the same, because you really learn by your bad experiences. It's your only way. But the whole model of like young people come to us and we're going to do everything we can to make what we're putting on as engaging, as entertaining as possible. So, you know, back in the day, it used to be, oh, just come along and we'll feed you. But now it has to be more than that. It's like Five Guys burgers. We got bungee runs. There's slushy machines, and you might win some AirPods. I don't know how you can keep building on that year after year. In 3 years' time, 5 years' time, it might be like you're going to win a Tesla. You're going to have like Boohoo clothing every month for the rest of your life. Like, you can't just keep trying to make it more entertaining. There has to be space for a real encounter of the Holy Spirit for young people to get their lives changed. Because ultimately, when they go to university, they might forget what you said, but they won't forget the encounter that they had with God, and it's ultimately that which will see them through the rest of their life. So I think youth work looks a little bit more like going to them rather than expecting them to come to you. And it means that you might be going to the football game when they're playing. You might be calling them the night before the exam. You might be going for a milkshake with them the next day to help them because they're struggling with anxiety because the exam didn't go well. The problem with that is that the metrics, the measurables, they aren't as easy to measure. So back in the day, I could say we had 500 young people in the building. We had 100 teams. There was 50 salvations, and we saw 25 join a new connect group. Real easy metrics, and almost like you could get a sense of performance, from that. Like, I've done well as a leader. But what I love about this new kind of wave of youth ministry is you can't measure it as well. You just need to raise up youth leaders that are just going to steward what God has given them well, those 5 young people, and give everything they can to help them. And you might not be able to get a spreadsheet of growth, but if there's been spiritual growth in the lives of those 5 young people that you're discipling, I think it's way worth it. I think if as youth leaders, we don't actually get the glory for what we're building because we can't do the Instagram photo at the back of the big building. But it's in the private, it's in the unseen. I think ultimately that's one of the healthiest places that we could be in as youth leaders, because what we're about isn't meant to be for our own glory and accolade and affirmation anyway. It's always meant to be for God's glory, because we're trying to raise young people to follow Jesus. So I think there's so much potential in where youth ministry is going, and I'm actually really excited about it.
It's so refreshing to hear because, that you just described, what we said we used to measure the metrics on. That was exactly how I would run youth ministry. And of course, in all of that, we totally cared for the kids like you did. You wanted the best for them. But I think like the world is a lot more complex, and these kids that are growing up now, it's hugely complicated. I love what you said earlier, where you said youth leaders need to know the names of the people that are coming. I'm going to add, but not just the numbers. Like, it's great. I'm sure people are still going to count because we're all pastors and that's what we love to do. But knowing the names as well is definitely a major part, and I loved hearing that. What about, you talk about this intimate way of doing youth ministry, right? For me, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. But it throws up a lot of problems, right? It throws up problems of like, so these young people, they come in with all their questions and they're like, set views on what life should and shouldn't be. And then you've got this like Bible, which we were really privileged to grow up under and learn and kind of grapple with. these kids are coming through with no biblical literacy, no knowledge of how it's put together, with their opinions pretty set on this is everything from sexuality to how we should live to what family looks like to God and what that should be. How do you then journey that through? How do you ensure that what are your thoughts on making sure that we don't just raise a generation of people that can raise their hands in worship and know how to pray for each other, but are lost when it comes to navigating what their view is of scripture? It's a convoluted question to basically say, Dan, help us all out, please.
Yeah, and I think I've got a lot more questions and answers on the subject. But what we did just do is we partnered with Varna and Biblical and World Vision, and we did a listening exercise where we listened to just under 25,000 teenagers, aged 13 to 17, across 25 different countries. And we got loads of different things back, like young people see Jesus as like loving and caring and kind, but they see Christians as judgmental and exclusive. So there's a big gap between how young people see Jesus and how they see Christians. We asked them what they care about when it comes to the world. And in America, the thing that was number one was anti-racism. In the UK and Europe was climate change. In India, it was pollution. In Indonesia, it was political corruption. So we got to see some of the things that bubbled to the top when it came to the cares for young people. But when it came down to the Bible, the big thing that came out was that this generation are open. They're called open Bible, which means they're open to the Bible. So they actually do want to know what the Bible says, and they actually do want to know what Jesus says when it comes to the best way that you can live your life to the full. But what they don't know is like how to read the Bible. They find it very confusing. There's a lot of very conflicting views in the Bible, and a lot of people saying a lot of different things about it. So I think what we can do is try and make it as accessible and understandable as possible, which means youth leaders and church leaders sitting down with their young people and I guess working out where they are at personally. The thing is, when you do these big surveys and big studies, you kind of get these broad stroke, I guess, overviews of where a generation's at. But I think personally, when it comes down to helping young people with the Bible, you just need to sit down with them individually and kind of ask them some questions to see, firstly, are they in a relationship with Jesus? Because if they're not in a relationship with Jesus and you're trying to help them to live the Jesus way, ultimately that's just behavior modification. You're saying do this and do that. But we need to make sure that if they are in a relationship with Jesus, then we're going to help them live the Jesus way. And we do that by working out where they're at. So some of them might be visual learners. So like Bible Project's got some great videos out at the moment, which explain some of the deeper stuff within the Bible. We do Youth Bible in 1 year, which is just an audio 15 minutes of breaking down different parts of the Bible. And there's so many different tools and resources, out there. And so I think youth leaders and church leaders just need to work out where the young people are, do some research on all the different tools that are out there right now, and actually make sure that we are helping them engage with those things and not assuming that they're all going to be at an intellectual level where they can just dive into the Bible themselves.
So good, Dan. What about when it comes to like empowering young people in church? Like, not to harp back on, I said it a few times, but me growing up in the youth ministry, it was like, if we want to go and help at church, go and help. And that was the empowerment of me becoming a leader, right? Was like run the PA desk, do the acetates as it was in those days. Like stack the chairs at the end of the service. It was like, it was not, no one, there was no plan. It was just jump on board with the mission really of us meeting in schools and a whole load of other stuff in the church I grew up in. What is it? This generation that you've talked about, Gen Zs, really, the Gen Z generation, are labeled a lazy generation, or they're labeled they don't want hard work, they want to all put on a plate. How does it work when it comes building church with these guys? What would your kind of like 33,000-foot view of advice be to people who've got young people? Of how do you engage them in kind of leadership? Let's say they're starting to love the Bible a bit and they've done what you just described there. What about engaging them in like, hey, like, take some ownership and leadership? What does that look like in church nowadays?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great question. When I sit with a lot of young people, I actually don't think they're lazy at all. I think the way they work looks differently to us. And the way they put their time and their hours into different aspects of life looks very different to us. So they really value a big social life. So instead of like, work to live, instead of work to live, they live to work, or whatever way
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is, we can work that out. But for them, they just they'll work so that they can have a great social life with their friends. And so they really value like, community and connection. Also, like a lot of them are creating their own platforms. This generation is called the super creatives because they can create on their phone at such a smart level. And they don't need to go to university to become a videographer or photographer. They just go on YouTube and they get a tutorial and then, they're off away. And a lot of that they just do in private and they'll work all hours of the night. A lot of people won't have a clue about how much stuff they're putting into some of that tech stuff. And so I am seeing a generation that's working hard. But to answer your question, I'm seeing a lot of their gifts, skills, and passions are not the things or avenues for them to be involved with in church. So, like you're saying, yeah, stack the chairs, welcome team, hand out coffees, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can get your young people involved in what you're doing, I think that's awesome. It's not going to have a negative impact on them at all to get a sense of being part of the community and the vision. But I do think that church probably needs to rethink the different roads in which young people can serve. And it's almost like sitting down with them again, listening to them, finding out what their skills are, passions are, what they really love to do, what they care about, what social action, social justice things are they really passionate about, and then making sure that within church we've got roles for them to actually use their God-given gifts and to help take the church forward in those different areas. And I think I've always, in my years of being a pastor, if I met someone and they had a certain gift and certain passion, but I didn't have an actual ministry set up for them to use that skill, gift, and passion, it was like, well, why don't you? Why don't you start this? And why don't we pull some people together and start something new and try something? I'd much rather try something and overcome the fear of failure than sit in there, not creating space for this person who might have a gift that we haven't even created space for. So ultimately, yeah, I just think we need to keep listening to young people and creating spaces for them to serve, knowing that serving is going to look a bit differently moving forward.
Amazing. What about the cross section of listening to people and it getting to a point of contention? So we listen, let's take, your hot topics, right? The youth love a hot topic of the day. Everyone loves a hot topic actually at the moment of the day. But
Yeah.
the cross section of like, as a church, we do believe X, Y, and Z. It could be anything from baptism to sexuality to mate, structures and women in leadership, right? I don't know. It could be all sorts. And then you've got this listening arm of your church with young people. They've taken on loads of the advice you've given there and great little wisdom of listen, sit with them, be where they're at. How have you found that of like of working with a generation that not only might they have their own opinion, there is a whole school of people that would back up their opinion as well, and they're very comfortable with it, and yet it doesn't fit with the community that they're going to walk into week to week. Again,
Mm.
like, has it worked? Where have you seen it work? Where have you seen this best work?
Yeah. Again, it's such a great question. I think when you look at churches now across the globe, you see a lot of signs like "You belong here," "Welcome home," "Come as you are." And the reason churches have to put those signs up is because the history would say that that has not been people's experience. Notice that the pubs and the cafes don't say "Welcome home," "You belong here," "Come as you are," because they don't need to put those signs up because people feel like they belong. People feel like they can just be themselves in those spaces. Um, you know, throughout history, whether it's racism, whether it's how intellectual you are, whether it's your behavior, whether it's the way you dress, there's always been levels of exclusivity within the church where people have not belonged. So now the church is trying to say, no, you do belong. But then when you start listening to people and there's a difference of opinion, the question is, as a church, you need to work out to what opinion does that mean that that person does not belong in your church? And I think that's why this conversation is different for every denomination and it's different for every church because one church says you can believe that and you can still belong. And another church says, well, you can't believe that. So therefore you don't belong. And, ultimately, I think we need to pray. We need to spend time with the Holy Spirit. We need to think, what would Jesus be doing in this area? But some churches will be saying, yeah, you can believe that and you can belong here. And other churches will say, you can't believe that and you can't belong here. And this is the hardest thing for young people because they see so much separation, so much difference in thought when it comes to this. And that's why I love Alpha because Alpha is literally, it's just the gospels. It's like, who is Jesus? Why did he die? How can I have a relationship with him? Why Bible? Why prayer? And then it's like, we can't go any deeper than that because we can't keep doing everything for all the different denominations because all the different denominations have different theology. That's why I love worship songs, because in worship songs, we're not singing about, do you think it's okay to get tattoos? What do you think about abortion? And what do you think about women in leadership? Worship is literally just giving glory to God, thanking him that he sent his son, he died and rose again. And worship unites all denominations because we're just focusing on the things that we agree with. And that's in essence what Alpha does. But on everything else that we don't agree with, that's up for the churches to decide. And Alpha, isn't going to get involved in that. Well, I'm definitely not, because I think it has to come at a personal, local level where it's contextualized for them and their church.
Yeah, and I love that because it's a table. Like back to your point, it's a I know your name conversation. I've been at your football game. And we can have a conversation like love is in the mix. And so, one of the questions that I've been talking about with a few people is people, you can have a conversation with someone and disagree if love's in the mix, but love needs to be in the mix with each other. But the more healthy conversations that can go on between church and church members, be it a young member or be it an old member, of where, look, we can still love each other and lovingly disagree on this. That will have consequences, but the consequence should never be we remove our love out of the mix. And what you're talking about, I think table conversations around some of these big topics is where the church needs to become really skillful at.
Yeah.
Whereas what we've become accustomed to and very skillful at is the platform conversation. Well, the platform conversation is pretty clumsy. I was in a church the other day where someone spoke out and said, depression is a spirit. And I was like, oh man, like, do you realize what you've just clod hopped over all that and you've just stamped all over? And do you know the stats of the amount of people in here that are on depression tablets? And do you know what that then means? Do you know the guilt and the shame and the condemnation you've just put on people? Yet we're used to that kind of like big statement stuff. I love Alpha. I'm one of the biggest fans. I think I've ran maybe 10 or 12 Alphas in my life. I love them. I'm absolutely love the format. I hate it when a church does an alpha, but it isn't an alpha. It's like, yeah, we do alpha and it's like 3 parts and there's no food. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you've hacked alpha. Don't hack it. Just do what it says on the
Yeah.
tin. And I've always campaigned for it, which is like, we do it all. We do the weekend away. We do the Holy Spirit baptism, whatever they say in the manual, just do it. And I've always had an amazing time on doing all the alphas I've done. To close off, talk to us about Youth Alpha. Like everyone listening, I think they might be familiar with like the adult alpha. Is it exactly the same Youth Alpha? Does it run in the same way? Does the youth pastor, the youth minister, the youth volunteer, do they deliver the sessions? What does it look like?
So Alpha Youth was created by two guys in Canada because when they were younger, they wanted to take Alpha, the Nicky Gumbel videos, but into their local school because they were teenagers. Their names were Ben and Jason, two incredible lads, and they just had a vision to create a youth version. And then they created one. It was successful, so they created another one. It's now been done by 3 million young people. And it was because of, I guess, the take up of Alpha Youth, which is why I stepped into this position. And in 2024, we will launch the English speaking version of the next series. And then after that, we'll do an Asia Pacific, Latin America, Africa, India, German, French, and Arabic version. And then we will probably subtitle another 40 different languages after that. But the goal would be that every teenager somehow gets Alpha in their own language, even with their own hosts or own like kind of Vox Pops interviews on the streets, because I want to move away from creating in the West for the rest. It has to be personal for that young person. Otherwise, they're just not going to feel valued and appreciated. So that's the long-term goal of Alpha Youth. And we're looking at animation. We're looking at breaking down a lot of like the Christianese and expectations which we had in the last series, which we know there's kind of like post-Christian, pre-Christian generation won't even have. But I think, we're so excited. We're in the writing phase right now. And we just realized that for a whole generation, they're not asking, is Jesus true? They're actually asking, is he good? And we need to be able to take some space at the beginning just to show young people like the goodness of God, I guess the wonder of God. And then once they get to see and hear some of that, then people will get to find out the truth and the more apologetics about, why he came to earth and how we know that he came to earth.
Amazing. And does it run the same format? Gather young people around a meal. How do you recommend people to do it? Do alpha for young people?
Yes, so I think Alpha Youth is never going to be just consuming content at home alone. It has to be like in a discussion, conversation, space with friends so that you can actually process these thoughts together. It's the generation that's just Googling all the questions by themselves, getting some random website, giving them a random answer, and they're like, okay, that must be it. But really, getting to the core of what the answer really is comes with processing with other people, hearing other perspectives. And so, yeah, there's hospitality, food, really important part of it, community, conversation, really important part of it. And then when it comes to the actual content, it can be the videos that we create or it can be live talks. Because at the end of the day, like there's so many brilliant speakers out there. And we want to be able to create space for like young youth pastors and leaders to be able to, speak in front of people. And so we give them all the scripts as well so that they can contextualize it, localize it, and add in their own stories.
Amazing. How do people find out? How do people register? How do people get, like, if they're listening to this, like, I want to do this in my church? How do they do it?
Yes, so you can just jump on youth.alpha.org, or if you're on social media, just search Alpha YTH, Alpha Youth, and there's loads of different links to all the different resources. And we've got coaching teams all around the world who will happily either come to your church or create a Zoom, and everything that we do is for free. We don't charge for anything because we're there to help resource and support the local church.
Dan, you are a massive blessing, mate, and so blessed to hear everything that's tumbled out of you today. And huge thanks for giving up some of your time to speak to us. And so, yeah, be blessed in all you're doing, mate. You're doing an incredible job.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me with you. Loved it.
Well, massive thank you, Dan Blythe, for that. I loved hearing his heart and also just his depth of knowledge of working with young people. And I really want to encourage anyone, if you're working with young people, please check out Alpha. Check out all that they're doing. And there's just something on it that works. And maybe just take a break from your usual young people's program and just say, we're just going to do an Alpha and we're just going to see what it does. There's something on it. There's reasons why he said 3 million young people have done it so far. And so go check it all out. And also have a great rest of your week. Be blessed in all that you're doing and keep doing a great job building local church. Love you.